That's why not all sugar is bad and we shouldn't see sugar as bad. It's just the amounts of certain types of sugars that we need to consider and what we consume those sugars with. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah Jean here, qualified, insured and registered sports nutritionist with the board of nutritionists in Australia, Sports Nutrition Australia. Just so you know, before you listen to the podcast and think, what is this crazy lady on about? This episode is going to discuss why we crave sugar and why we're craving sugar all the time. Specifically, I'm going to focus on mums and the struggles that are specific to mothers and why they may end up craving sugar maybe more now than they did prior to having kids. So if you Google why people crave sugar, due to a combination of evolutionary, psychological and physiological factors, including the brain's reward system, which releases dopamine and pleasure when we eat sweets, and gut bacteria that can influence cravings. So the internet is literally telling you it comes down to biology. Yes, absolutely, we do crave sugar for lots of different reasons, and by eating sugar, we can basically allow ourselves to receive a dopamine hit. So dopamine being a hormone that makes us feel better. Similar to things like alcohol consumption, which can increase dopamine, gambling, even sex, right? There are going to be lots of different activities that we can engage in, and food being one of them. Eating, specifically sugar, salty foods as well, fatty foods, foods that taste nice, because it's in relation to your taste buds and your experience of eating as well. But the last part of the sentence is the most interesting part, and it's probably going to be the part that I want to focus on, and as well, the next sentence. So gut bacteria that can influence cravings. Lifestyle factors like stress, lack of sleep, and habit also contribute to sugar cravings, which are reinforced by the availability of sugar-rich foods in modern environments. So you can see here how it could be considered to be a complex and multifaceted issue. Not only are we craving sugar because it makes us feel good, but also because societal standards, Western diet, sugar is everywhere, it's in everything, it's like cocaine. Now, don't get me wrong, this podcast is not going to be a podcast which blames sugar for our problems, nor is it going to bash on sugar as an all or nothing approach that this is just terrible and you shouldn't consume sugar and stay away from chocolate and sweets, because I cannot reiterate enough that without balance, we also end up binging on sugar anyway. There are a lot of fitness influencers out there at the moment who are preaching an all or nothing approach, whereby they're saying, you know, if you eat donuts, if you eat sugary foods, you're not going to be feeling full from them. You digest them really quickly. You need lots of them. They're not nutritious. They, really bash on sugary foods or high sugar content foods, what we would consider to be high, I suppose. And they don't actually talk enough about how to incorporate these foods in moderate amounts into your diet without binging on them, so that you can have them every day in small amounts and not feel like you need to eat copious amounts of them. So one of the worst things that you can do if you do have sugar cravings, sounds kind of counterintuitive, but is to cut out sugary foods altogether. Now, what this does is, through sheer deprivation and not allowing yourself to have a particular food type, you are basically creating a little bit of a complex in your mind, whereby you've got this black and white thinking of this is all good or all bad. So when you do that, just like anything in life that you take away from yourself, whether it's a child or an adult, if you do it for long enough, you feel like you're missing out. You get FOMO, you miss things, you crave them, you want the thing you can't have. You feel sad that other people are eating it. You get jealous. You have social events where you can't control yourself, or you say, no, I can't have that, or no, I'm not eating that right now. I'm not eating sugar. I've cut it out, or etc. So see how this extreme approach, and this is how I used to operate. 13 years ago, I had an eating disorder. And I was like, no sugar, no processed foods, no McDonald's, no nothing. To be fair and honest, I don't eat McDonald's now, not because it's bad for me, but because it doesn't make me feel very good. But I look at it from a different perspective. And since I studied nutrition, I have a postgraduate degree in nutrition, I learned something incredibly interesting about sugar. And it is that there are no correlation, or at least any sort of studies that have been done on sugar that can prove that sugar alone is bad for you or is going to make you gain weight. The only study that we've seen that proves that sugar is bad for you is in relation to tooth decay. So they've done trials and studies where they have fed people processed foods in control groups. Okay, if you want to look these up, I'm happy to send them to you. I'm just not going to quote them in this video. It wastes time and it's just technical jargon, but I'm happy to send the links. They've done studies where they've given highly processed foods in the way of things like fatty food, sugary food, you name it, to a clinical trial group. And they also gave foods that weren't processed, the same amount of calories for both, right? And they found there was absolutely no weight gain in both groups. Even though, yes, the group that ate mostly or only whole foods, so, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds, etc., meats, blah, literally means a food that is basically only one ingredient or as close as possible to that. So it's in its whole version. And they gave the other group, as I said, highly processed foods, the same amount of calories, but just processed. So, they weren't getting as much bang for their buck. They weren't feeling as full, and they probably wanted to eat more, but they were eating only this allotment of calories. And there was no weight gain in both studies. Okay, so calories do matter in both cases. So when we compare them, the whole foods versus the processed foods, same calories, no weight gain. So sugar, and especially in the processed food group, was a high sugar group. So sugar is not to blame for our weight gain. However, that's all good and well. I'm talking about craving sugar. How come we're craving sugar and then we end up over consuming the foods that are high calorie, so ultra processed foods? We have a lot of them. You might eat a whole packet of lollies or a whole block of chocolate, and you might feel really guilty afterwards and think, I don't know why I just did that. I didn't want to do it, but I felt almost like compulsively driven to do it. It was like I was a rabid animal. I'm going to talk about multiple reasons why you're probably craving sugar and you don't even realize that they're mistakes you're making. One of the biggest issues I've seen, and this has been in my inbox lately and in my DMs with mums who've grown up in the 80s, 90s and 2000s, so people in my own age group, say 30 plus or so, is that 90s and 2000s culture unfortunately has led us to believe that carbohydrates in general are something that you need to avoid eating when you want to diet and lose weight. Couldn't be further from the truth. You don't need to avoid them entirely, but sometimes, yes, a reduction of total carbohydrates is necessary. However, most of the time, it's a reduction in your total fat intake, which is going to be the main problem. A lot of people don't realize they're accidentally consuming too many fats in their diet, and that is because a lot of Western foods and meals just naturally contain more fats. Some of the more processed foods have added fats to them, and some of our meals are typically quite fatty and dense in lots of different types of fats, things like cheeses, things like nuts. Now, nuts aren't bad, but in more amounts, they're going to overdo our calories. So fats, as I said in previous podcasts, are very calorie dense. However, we've obviously got the keto diet, the carnivore diet, which can typically, and they have been in the past, seem to be quite high fat diets. The issue with that is that if a person cuts out carbohydrates altogether or stops eating like grains, oats, bread, all of that jazz, every type of carb they can think of, no potato, of course, it's going to reduce their total calories, but if they replace it with fats and high fat diet instead, it then does three things which are not ideal. The first thing it does is the person's blood sugar to have its normal response to what we need, which is carbohydrates, which means that we end up trying to survive off pretty low blood sugar during the day. So we end up waking up, our blood sugar is low, we don't give it carbohydrates, and it remains relatively low throughout the day. Protein can definitely increase blood sugar marginally because we can convert protein to glucose, which we need for blood sugar, but not as effectively as carbohydrates. So what do we need for sustained blood sugar? We need carbohydrates. Blood sugar being sustained is a good thing. However, on the internet of late, we've had so much being thrown around about insulin resistance and how blood sugar being spiked is a bad thing and blah, blah, blah. This isn't coming from qualified professionals, and increasing your blood sugar and keeping it steady throughout the day is going to be a positive experience for your body. It's something that you actually need for brain function and energy provision, and also to prevent cravings. So when you consume carbohydrates, there are going to be a few different types of carbohydrates that you can consume. We know, in fact, they fall into lots of different groups. So we have things like sucrose, fructose, lactose, galactose specifically, and there are going to be many other types of sugars, but they're just some of the common ones, okay? Sucralose as well. Now, people think the types of sugars are going to then influence how much body fat they gain. Not necessarily. It's more about the digestive process and how slowly or quickly it's digest. Again, it doesn't mean that if a carbohydrate digests fast that you shouldn't be eating it at all. I'll give a few examples. So if you start your day with a breakfast smoothie, let's say you have some fruit in your smoothie, but you don't have any oats. You've got some protein powder and you've got some peanut butter. Maybe you've got some light milk. So let's say you're carb cutting. You just decided that you just don't want to have oats because they're carbs. Now, what you get from that smoothie is you'll get a quick release, not too fast, but fast enough from the fructose, so your blood sugar will go up pretty quickly. Okay, it won't go up as quickly as a teaspoon of sugar, and it won't come down as quickly either, but it will be faster than, say, oats. Now, fruit is a good source of carbohydrate. However, it's going to release a little faster than, say, for example, carbohydrates will release from oats, and also from things like wholemeal bread or rye or sourdough. And again, the difference between rye and wholemeal and, say, white bread is that it is just digested slower, rye and sourdough, and it ferments in the gut a little bit better than, say, white bread does. So that brings us back to the sentence which I was interested in, which is the gut bacteria can influence cravings. Gut bacteria isn't some sort of magical unicorn thing that just occurs on its own. It is reliant upon what we put into our stomachs for the gut bacteria to then respond accordingly. If we put nothing but fatty, shitty food in there, then yes, we will have yucky gut bacteria. And then obviously as a result of that, we can then see the influence on hunger, hormones, and digestive processes, which is going to result in potentially those negative experiences such as excessive sugar cravings. So there's lots of different ways that we can crave sugar, and it's not just through carbohydrate cutting, but also through consuming a highly processed diet and not enough whole foods. So without speaking too much jargon, what does that mean? It basically means that when you diet, you need to think of it like, look at the food pyramid, right? Now, don't diss the food pyramid, because trust me when I say it's written by professionals, people who have qualifications for a reason. It actually advises that you eat a larger amount of grains, oats, and complex carbohydrates such as sweet potato and potato. And yes, that's even for weight maintenance and weight loss. The reason why is because they are going to digest slower in your system and sustain your blood sugar more steadily across the day. With sustained blood sugar, guess what you don't get as many of? Sugar cravings. Why? Because your blood sugar is already at a level where it needs to be. It's not too high and it's not too low. Now, people worry about blood sugar going too high. Yes, you can definitely have episodes of hypoglycemia, where, for example, you might see that, hypoglycemia, where your blood sugar goes really, really high and you get sugar sweats and, you're shaking and all sorts of stuff and you almost pass out. That may probably happen if you scull a liter of full sugar soft drink followed by a block of chocolate followed by a bag of lollies. Like, you've got to consume a significant amount of sugar, unless you struggle with diabetes, in which case it's going to be slightly different for you. But when we think about the other direction, which is hyperglycemia, that's really low blood sugar. Most people who are trying to diet, cut their calories and consume a keto diet or a paleo diet. Paleo is not as bad because you can still have potato, but a carnivore diet, etc. most of them are going to spend a significant amount of time in a state of low blood sugar. So if you have adopted the keto diet and you've just thought to yourself, I don't know why I feel so shit all the time and I'm all of a sudden craving sugar a couple of weeks in or a couple of days in, it's because there's not enough sugar in your actual diet for you to sustain blood sugar. That's why not all sugar is bad and we shouldn't see sugar as bad. It's just the amounts of certain types of sugars that we need to consider and what we consume those sugars with. So let's think about that smoothie situation again. Now, if I was to list in order of carbohydrates that we need larger amounts of, it would be, as I said, on that food pyramid, if you want to Google it, you can. You would have grains, sweet potato, and potato at the base. Okay, so this is where you're going to consume a larger amount of these, and they're going to make up the quarter of your plate or the portion plate that then gives you that sustained energy. Okay, so maybe a third a cup of oats, half of oats. It's going to be different from person to person. And then you're going to have other different types of carbohydrates like fruits and vegetables. Now they fall into a different category, which you have slightly less of than the grains and things like potato and sweet potato, which are called starchy vegetables, but you're still going to have enough of those to be able to meet your requirements of those particular carbohydrate groups. Now, the thing with fruit is it does give you a little bit more of a sugar boost than, for example, say carrot or spinach would, because they have a lower sugar level. But the cool thing about fruit and vegetables is they digest slowly. Now, what do you think that means for the sugar contained in those carbohydrate sources? It means that the release of the sugar from those carbohydrate sources is also a little bit slower. Why is that though? It's because the sugars that are contained in these sources are going to also bypass things like the kidneys and liver. So we're seeing a process occur here which is slowing down even the micronutrient uptake of these particular food items. So the consensus that even with the complex carbohydrates, they are really slowly digested, specifically brown rice more than white rice, dark bread more than white bread. But in general, it's going to be that grains are digested slower than, for example, a block of chocolate. So you're getting a nice drip feed of sugar that you need for your brain and your blood sugar to be balanced throughout the day. Now, we need to continue to dose these amounts of carbohydrates. We can't just eat them in one big bolus, and the issue with that is because our digestive tract doesn't just stop and wait and then take what it needs. It will digest as food is being placed into it. So I always compare this to my clients as like a conveyor belt. Carbohydrates come through, food in general comes through, and we want to make sure it's getting a nice even amount each time. So similar calories, similar portions, and that we're eating regularly. The problem with only eating one meal per day or 2 meals per day is you have this massive gap where blood sugar then dips and drops and it gets really low, and then you wait and then you put that meal in later on, that massive meal. Unfortunately, it's not enough time for your blood sugar to be at a steady level and to get it from this low point up to where it needs to be. That takes a long time for you to digest that meal, which then can result in, unfortunately, the negative impact is blood sugar doesn't raise enough for your body to then cotton on to the idea that there is enough sugar in your system and your blood sugar is high enough. Once your blood sugar has been sustained at a low level for too long and hasn't got the carbohydrates coming in at that nice paced rate, is that you end up getting more hunger signals sent to your stomach and to your brain. And this is where you'd basically end up eating more and more food. So there are different hunger hormones called ghrelin and leptin. And ghrelin is a hunger hormone, which you would then have released higher amounts of if your blood sugar is not back to baseline. Okay, and this can sometimes even happen if you've eaten a big meal and you're waiting for your stomach to digest this big meal. The blood sugar is only slowly rising, so then you think to yourself, I'm still hungry, because we get the hunger hormone ghrelin sent in there, which then as a result ends up being our cravings for sugar, etc. So this is why fasting doesn't work very well, because your blood sugar is not sustained at that healthy level throughout the day. What will happen with blood sugar before we're due to eat again is that we will see this little dip. What we don't want is from the baseline, your blood sugar getting down here. So basically at a very low point. Because as I said, trying to get your blood sugar back up again to where it needs to be for baseline can take a little bit of effort and work and time and waiting for your food to properly digest. And for the signals to be sent to your stomach that you are full, which is your leptin hormone, your satiating hormone. Now, it's not just going to be your carbohydrate intake that's the problem, so the lack thereof. People cutting carbs all over the shop and thinking they have to cut everything out that contains carbohydrates, but then they binge on sugary foods as a result. It's literally their body saying, I don't have enough blood sugar. I need something, and that's where you start craving the quick release stuff. Why? Because it releases quickly. So it means that your body says, oh, I'm going to have that sugar now. I'm going to get it quickly. It's literally a survival mechanism because you haven't been feeding it enough potato, sweet potato, oats, brown and rye bread, and obviously other complex carbs like brown rice, etc., etc. If you're consuming more amounts of those in moderate amounts in each main meal specifically, and then also in your snacks, so let's say breakfast, lunch, dinner, 2 snacks, and maybe a little dessert if you want to fit it in, 5 to 6 times per day is recommended for sure to try and keep blood sugar stable and to mitigate hunger and sugar cravings. So you shouldn't actually be getting, while you're dieting, hungry at all during the day. If you're not getting hungry, that's probably a good sign and it means that your body is getting what it needs. If you are so used to dieting and starving yourself and having low blood sugar and feeling like you're going to pass out and thinking this is great, I'm losing body fat, you don't need to go to that extreme. You literally do not need to do that. And that's probably what's resulting in your binge eating and sugar craving behaviors. Okay. When you start eating more of the good stuff, the oats, the sweet potato, the foods that aren't super calorie dense, but give you enough energy to sustain your day, you then end up craving less of the quick release sugars and you just don't want as many of them. Why? Because you are satisfied and because your stomach is getting those satiated hormones sent to it to say, yep, I'm fine, I don't need any more. My blood sugar is stabilized. So there's actually a conversation which is had between blood sugar, insulin, and your stomach and gut bacteria and the hormones that release. Hopefully I'm making sense and you're still tracking. Again, if you would like me to send some studies to you on this, I'm more than happy to do that. I'm just not going to cite them in a vlog. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can do your own research if you want to. I would just suggest making sure that you look at peer-reviewed studies and ensuring that they have been cross-referenced by those and done multiple times as well. So the study has not just been performed once. Now, there is two other reasons why you may be craving sugar. So it's not just the fact that you're not eating enough slow digesting carbohydrates and probably not eating often enough either and skipping breakfast, etc., and letting your blood sugar go quite low. But also another reason for it is that people are probably not consuming enough fiber in their diet. Now, I've introduced things like complex carbohydrates and protein and fats and, all these different concepts and you're probably not following, or maybe you might get confused, or maybe you know what I'm talking about. But basically fiber is just little bristles that are contained in things like plant-based foods, like carbohydrates, grains, potato, all the things I referenced before, the slow digesting carbs. So you're not just going to solve the problem of a low fiber diet just by consuming more complex carbohydrates. You will need to consume fruits and vegetables, non-starchy vegetables and fruits, and also nuts and seeds. Obviously don't consume a large amount of nuts and seeds because that can overdo your calories, your fats, but they do contain the fiber that you need to reach your minimum intake. Now, the minimum intake for women is 25 grams per day and it's 35 grams for men. Most people aren't actually receiving or getting enough fiber in their diets every day, and this is also why a lot of us are experiencing digestive issues. A lot of us are also consuming too much insoluble fiber and not enough soluble fiber. So I've talked about that in another podcast, but basically as a whole picture, it's usually because they're under consuming their fruits and vegetables and also under consuming their complex carbohydrates. When you fix this and start having enough of these foods, you do often find not only does your digestion improve, but you stop craving as many of those sugary and sweet foods. Again, one of the main reasons for this is because fiber fills up the gut. So it sits in the gut lining as kind of like, I'd imagine, if you were to have a water balloon. And let's say you filled the water balloon with air. That air, if you were to throw, for example, I don't know, a piece of chocolate into the air, and you throw that piece of chocolate around, that chocolate's not really going to touch much of the edge of the balloon. And so you imagine when food touches the sides of our GI tract, our intestinal wall, it then sends signals to our brain that there is food in our stomach and that we need to absorb and digest that. So what fiber does is it basically spreads out, and it's going to act as like a protective layer. It actually fills up the gut lining, and imagine having that water balloon and you've just gone in and you've added a ton of feathers. Okay, and so the feathers have a larger surface area. The other thing that fiber benefits us with regards to is going to be moving matter, chyme, poop, through our GI tract. And so fiber is incredibly bristly. It's like a brush, and it does basically the cleaning of our GI tract. This is why the keto and carnivore diets are flawed. They often don't contain large amounts, if any, fiber. And we see with high fat diets, there is significant study. If you'd like me to send them to you, I can, on the fact that a low fiber diet is directly correlated to higher instances of, yes, bowel cancer. I've mentioned it before. So what is the solution here? We need more fiber in our diet. The recommended intake for fruit is 200 to 300 grams of raw fruit per day, and anywhere between 400 and 600 grams of raw vegetables. It can vary from country to country and depending on recent studies as well, slightly by 100 grams or so. And it would be a mixed combination, so 2 to 3 different types of fruit, different colors preferably, and same with your vegetables, however, 3 to 5 different types of vegetables, okay? So now we know that 2 of the major reasons we're craving sugar is going to be a lack of complex carbohydrates and a lack of fruit and vegetables in our diet, and fiber, right? So fiber is going to be in fruits, vegetables, and complex carbohydrates and nuts and seeds. So now I've talked about the carbohydrate side of things. Another reason why we might be craving sugar is actually a lack of protein. Again, the most common issues I see with people's diets is that when they try to lose weight, they just consume things like salads, and they will add like avocado and feta and olives and cheese and all of the fats and no carbs, and then hardly any protein as well. And they'll get to dinner time and they'll have their biggest amount of protein then. But the problem with having all your protein in one sitting is protein is very filling. So oftentimes your minimum protein intake, you're not going to be able to get in one meal. It just fills you up too quickly. So if you're skipping breakfast, you're probably not getting enough protein in for your day. And by skipping breakfast, not only are you not getting the carbohydrates you need to increase your blood sugar to baseline and sustain it throughout the day, but you're also not getting the protein to help keep you fuller for longer. And protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It makes you feel the fullest out of protein, fats, and carbs. Protein makes you feel full. I know in my mind I'm consuming enough fiber and complex carbohydrates, and I often know in my day, because I'm not tracking my food at the moment, if I start to crave sugar and I've had those other foods most recently, I probably haven't had enough protein. So I'll go and have a protein shake or some beef jerky or some tuna or something that is obviously going to be a little bit higher in protein and not high in fats and carbs if I've already had them. Now, what protein doesn't do is it doesn't necessarily increase blood sugar to where you want it to be like carbohydrates do, but protein can be, as I said, converted into glucose to increase your blood sugar, just not as effectively, but definitely more effectively than fats. So the other thing that protein does is by filling you up, again, it sends a satiating hormone leptin to the stomach, and it then decreases the ghrelin hunger hormone. So oftentimes, if you're not consuming enough protein, which a lot of women are not doing, especially women, they have a negative attitude towards protein. They think it's going to make them bulky or gain weight or something ridiculous. But if you're not consuming enough protein, you probably could do with adding in something like a protein powder. If you don't want to eat meat every single meal of the day, if you don't mind doing that, then that's fine. And you don't mind eating, say, for example, high protein yogurt and meats, that's totally fine. If you those, then yeah, for sure, I would try and get your protein from whole food sources. But if you're not a big fan of lots of meat, like I'm not, I have 2 scoops of protein a day because I just can't stomach a lot of meat. I do eat chicken and beef in a day, but I don't like having meat twice a day, more than twice a day. It's just my personal preference, nothing to do with whether or not it's better for me or not. So if we know it's under consuming complex carbohydrates, under consuming fiber, and likely under consuming protein. See how it has almost absolutely nothing to do with willpower or whether you've got self-control or, whether you need to get rid of sugar out of your diet entirely. Another reason could be your water intake, and it's very likely going to be that as well. What I find with a lot of my clients who are binging on sugary foods is they don't just have one of these issues, but all of them. And that's leading them to a position where they've got really low blood sugar, they're really hungry, and they're dehydrated. Now, not consuming enough water is incredibly common. Dehydration is one of the most common problems we see in Western society. People think they only need to drink 2 liters for some dumb reason. For years and years and years, it was this idea that 2 liters was how much of water you needed every day. However, that's the minimum you need to survive. 3 liters is optimal. 3 to 4 is recommended by sports nutritionists. If you sit down all day, 2 liters maybe might get you by, but 3 to 4 liters, especially in Australian heat, is going to be optimal. So drinking more water, clear water, can actually make a massive difference to your sugar cravings. Unfortunately, we've seen that as human beings, we've not quite developed our ability to separate thirst from hunger exactly yet. And we end up with like a pasty feeling in our mouth when we are thirsty and when we're hungry. So I've got a little pasty feeling in my mouth at the moment. I know I could probably do with some more water. I've had, I think, 2 liters today, so I'll probably get to my 3 to 4. But the pasty feeling is very difficult to differentiate between whether we're hungry or we're thirsty. Now, one of the main things, ways you can tell the difference is hunger pains in your stomach and a pasty feeling. You might be hungry, but sometimes it pays to think about how much water you've had for the day. If you've only had a glass, if you've only had a liter and it's lunchtime and you've got the pasty and hungry feeling, you're probably really thirsty and dehydrated. And you might be hungry as well. You may not have eaten enough carbohydrates or protein or slow digesting carbohydrates. And if you're craving sugar. Now, you don't need to feel bad for craving sugar. I mean, at the end of the day, we do need some simple sugars as well. We can't just survive off just complex carbohydrates. I mean, we could just eat them, but our body does need little quick spikes of sugar, especially pre-training, so pre-exercise. If you go and eat a big bowl of brown rice or some brown bread before training, it takes a little while for the carbohydrates to release into your system. If you've also consumed it with fats and protein, it slows down the digestion of the carbohydrates even more, which is great for feeling fuller for longer and not craving sugar, but isn't necessarily super beneficial for giving you the energy that you need to exercise quickly. So if you are going to have your quick release carbohydrates at any time of the day, it should be 30 to 60 minutes prior to your training, which is a really good quick window before a gym session or a home session. And it might be, for example, in the morning or the afternoon. You might have something that you like as a small treat, which is sugary, but have it right before training. Some people have rice cakes, some people have rice cakes with honey, some people have a handful of lollies, some people have a mini chocolate. Completely up to you how you want to do it. Obviously, if you're on a meal plan, you want to try and go for the snack that you have in your meal plan that has the most amount of carbohydrates, quick release carbohydrates in it. So it would be where you would have a small amount of processed food, basically. And things like glasses of juice, they're going to digest quite quickly, or Gatorade, full sugar Gatorade, so that's another option pre-training. But don't get too confused by that. Obviously, a lot of people are binging on sugary foods late at night because they haven't eaten enough during the day. Their blood sugar's gotten really low, they've eaten dinner and it hasn't brought their blood sugar up fast enough, and voila, we end up with these uncontrollable hunger hormones releasing. And then we end up consuming large amounts of sugar in the evening where your body doesn't really need much of it. It doesn't mean that you're going to automatically gain body fat because you're eating sugar late at night. It's just that you're lumping all your calories into the end of the day and you're going to sleep, and you didn't really need them while you were sleeping. You do need some carbs to sleep, don't get me wrong. Still need potato in your dinner or brown rice and maybe a little mini dessert. But having that large amount of sugar really late at night because you're binging, because you haven't eaten enough during the day, isn't going to be beneficial because you're using most of your energy during the day when you're active, when you're exercising, when you're moving around, when you're talking, when you're working. Do you know how much energy your brain uses just thinking? It's crazy. It is the organ that uses the most energy. So, you need to be eating carbohydrates during the day to give your brain literal energy. Having it late at night is where you're probably, you have your binge episodes and you wake up in the morning and you feel hungover from all the sugar that you ate that your body didn't really need. And you end up feeling sick and yuck and gross. Now, the sugar will definitely still store as what's called glycogen in the muscle tissue. And this is where some people might see that if they've had a binge, they have a weight increase in the morning and they freak out and think they've gained body fat. Not necessarily. You can gain between 1 to 3 kilos of weight before it becomes body fat, because it is literally just extra glycogen, which is glucose converted into stored glycogen in the muscle tissue. So from here, what do you do with all this information? There are going to be some basic changes that you make to your diet. And probably one of the final points that I would give as advice if you do want to have these foods in your day is a tip that I gave one of my mums the other day, who reached out to me and said, I have a packet of chips that fit into my calories every day, but I've been finding that I have the packet and then I want another packet and a packet and I want another packet. And I said to her, why not consume your treat, your daily, a high protein source to try and fill yourself up so that you don't feel like binging? Something that I do. If I have a Nutella sandwich, I pair it with a protein shake or a high protein yogurt. If I decide that I want to have, for whatever reason, something on the weekends, it might be a meal out with family and friends, and it's, got something in it. It might be, ice cream or something. I make sure that I have something that's got protein in it. So I either have, some beef jerky or something like that before I go out, or a tin of tuna, or a protein shake, or a protein bar, or egg whites if you really want to have egg whites, or some chicken breast, but things that are obviously going to make sense. So I think the ones that are most common is beef jerky, protein powder, protein shake. What this does is it gives you the protein that you need to keep you fuller for longer, or otherwise you pair it with the quick release sugar that you're having. And then the cravings stop. You just don't want any more, and you still get to enjoy one serving of what you had. Something I often do is I love chocolate, so I will start my day with chocolate, and I'll have my mini chocolate in my breakfast with my oats and my protein powder, and see how I've paired it with complex, slow digesting carbohydrates and protein powder to not just give me slow digesting carbohydrates for slow release blood sugar, but also protein to help keep me fuller for longer, fruit, which then has fiber in it, and also some slower digesting carbohydrates, and my mini chocolate. And so what ends up happening is I don't feel like eating a whole packet of caramello koalas. I've got a little mini one I've already eaten for the day. I'm not depriving myself, and I'm consuming it with slow digesting foods that fill me up, so that then I don't want to eat more of that processed food. It's actually really simple to do this. And then drink water between your meals when you find that you're getting a bit snacky. Space your meals out 2 to 3 hours apart. So your meals and snacks. So breakfast at say 9, first snack at say 11, lunch at 1, and then maybe your second snack, 3 p.m. munchies, or 4 p.m., whatever time suits you best. And then dinner might be 6 or 7 p.m. and then you might have a dessert at say 9 p.m. as dessert. Now, there are lots of high protein versions of desserts and things. There's protein puddings, there's protein everything. Just be careful with packaging though, because some of them can say they're high protein and they're not really, because there's not a lot of standard in policing what is considered to be high protein. So my advice is for snacks, just make sure that the snack has around 15 to 20, even 30 grams of protein if you really want a decent bolus and you're starving. And make sure you pair it with some sort of fibrous food like fruits or vegetables. Every single meal, just have something from fruits or vegetables, and obviously sticking to those fruit and vegetable recommendations. And then also with your main meals, try and aim for say 30 grams a minimum of protein. And for some people, men or those who are a little bit heavier, then they will need to have more protein because it's based on body weight. So 30, 40, 50 grams. I've found the most I can consume in one sitting without feeling too full is 60 grams of protein. But you need to stop associating the feeling of fullness with the idea you're going to gain weight, because that's what leads to sugar cravings and binging on sugar. And my final point before I finish the podcast is pretty much a very obvious one, but lack of sleep. Lack definitely increase sugar cravings. Sometimes you could be doing all these things and for some reason you just still crave sugar. It's so much worse if you're doing all these things. You're drinking lots of liquid calories. You might be living off coffee and alcohol and fast digesting calories, energy drinks and soft drinks or whatever, liquid calories that, as I said, they're those quick release carbohydrates. And then you're sleep deprived. You're not making yourself any meals. You've got very little support at home. A lot of mums don't have a lot of support at home. And as a result, you end up then binging and craving sugary foods because you just haven't been eating things to fill you up or keep you fuller for longer. So please start associating feelings of fullness and satiation and satisfaction from whole foods and protein as a good thing to prevent you from binging excessively on sugary, high-calorie foods. The sugar isn't the problem, it's the total calories, and sugar does add up when you consume large amounts of concentrated, quick-release sugars. So that is it from me. Hopefully you took a lot away from this podcast, and the other part that I've got more to add, obviously, I just keep adding more. The other part to consider is if you eat a highly processed diet, you then end up with bad bacteria or an imbalance in gut bacteria, which people are talking a lot about, like repairing their gut health. A lot of the time it comes back to reducing your saturated fats in your diet and increasing complex carbohydrates, reintroducing them in fruits and vegetables, grains, dark grains and carbs like and sweet potatoes. So that will automatically, naturally start to repair your gut health, where you have the gut microbiome, which is more optimal for sustained blood sugar and also preventing sickness, helping with digestion. So there's a reason we need to eat fruits and vegetables and grains. I don't know how the internet has gotten so tied up in making this far more complex than it needs to be. But basic nutrition comes down to balance, and balance does not look like doing things in extremes. That is it from me. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are in the world listening to this podcast. Looking forward to doing another one for you soon. Bye-bye.